make it clear.
Order.
Well, I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with a panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Joining me tonight, she is from New Zealand's largest feminist blog, The Hand Mirror, commentator, blogger and local council board member, Julie Fairey. And he is a former Auckland mayoral candidate, thespian great and social commentator, Simon Prast. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, Issue 1. Are John Key's free Weet-Bix and milk enough to tackle child poverty? Issue 2. Opinion polls keep surging for the National Party. What is going wrong for Labour? And Issue 3 tonight, what's gone wrong with the Council's messaging of the Unitary Plan? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with Issue 1. The government's response to 70,000 hungry children going to school each week has been over 5 years in the making. While Leader of the Opposition, John Key, said that hungry children wasn't acceptable and that he would do something about it when in government. Well, that something has been done, and apparently expanding milk and Weet-Bix into schools that already have them is the solution. Julie, Sanitarium don't pay tax. Fonterra is a monopoly. Is allowing them to push their products into schools more corporate welfare, or is it corporate responsibility?
I think it is a form of corporate welfare, actually. There are plenty of other options in terms of breakfast that doesn't have to be milk and cereal, but they've locked this up for Sanitarium and for Fonterra. The issue about Sanitarium not paying tax is massive. They are actually based in my community, and they do some good work with the local community. But there are some broader issues about whether they are taking full corporate responsibility when they're not paying any tax.
What happens if you're poor and lactose intolerant
or gluten intolerant?
And gluten intolerant? What happens to those kids?
Exactly. You know, there's also, you know, what if the Weet-Bix is the main thing they're having all day, then, you know, where's the fruit, where's the veggies? And there are schools who've been doing initiatives based around community gardening and school gardening, where they're actually putting fruit and vegetables into meals that they provide for children. And they're actually not having to seek extra funding for that. They haven't got a corporate involved. And that's actually involving the community. The children help to grow the food. They're learning about how to, you know, how's food made, where does it come from, doesn't just come in a plastic package, all of those good things. So there are other ways that this could have been delivered, other than just going straight to two big corporates.
Where do corporations have a role in these sorts of things? I mean, do they have any role in child poverty?
I think they do. I think they can put up the wages of the people that they employ. That's the number one thing they could do, because that's ultimately what the problem here is. Incomes are too low. It's not just child poverty, it's actually family poverty. So
if they signed up to living wage agreements, we'd probably see a lot more actual positive outcome there?
That's right.
Simon, the cartoon in this week's Marlborough Express seems to sum up the resentment some in New Zealand view feeding hungry kids with. When benefits were set below the nutritional weekly minimums, how is the blame the parents meme been so successful in New Zealand?
Oh, it truly baffles me. On Facebook, I've got a couple of people that are just, it's straight into the parents, and it's blame the parents, and it's basically blame the poor for their poverty. And I think this is just an outrageous Tory argument that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, there are people in genuine need who just, they don't have, as you say, an income that they can live off. And this is a deeply structural problem. And this tinkering around with Weet-Bix, or Novapix, as I call it, I mean, it's a scandal. 1 in 5 children, 270,000 children, live in poverty. And this is what we get. I just think it's outrageous.
Is there a disconnect between some members of society and other members of society? Have we moved apart as a country? Because there seems to be, when you talk to people who say it's the parents' default and they want to have a go at the parents, it comes from the mouths of New Zealanders who don't look like they know much about poverty themselves, you know?
Oh, and I think that there is sort of an aspirational thing in people, is that, you know, they don't want to be seen as part of a class perhaps that can't feed its own children.
Right.
And so they're very quick to blame you know, the parents, and that I'm not like that. And I think it's a very sorry sign that the country is heading in a direction of divisiveness based on issues like this, where really we need to address the problem in a long-term way and not in a cheap political trick way.
Did you get a chance to see the cartoon?
I didn't.
It's
Did you get a chance
terrible.
to see the cartoon? Your thoughts?
Appalling. I just,
Was this a racist
it's
one?
very racist.
You
and
saw that?
yes.
Yeah, and
What-
Hone Harawira has complained to the Race Relations Commission. Apparently she's going to have something to say about it potentially this afternoon.
Is that the sort of cartoon you'd expect in the 2013 New Zealand?
No, I don't think so. And this issue, I think it's a hot button issue, and it really doesn't bring out the best in people.
No.
Julie, you wrote an excellent blog in the Hand Mirror challenging the "if you can't feed, you shouldn't breed" brigade. Why is this mentality so resilient in New Zealand?
I think that there's a real attitude of othering people who are poor. I can't be poor because I work hard, you know, and so it's sort of this. I feel safe from poverty because I know that I work hard, and it's people who don't work hard who end up in poverty. And actually it's all bullshit. It's all crap. There's a whole lot of reasons why people can end up in poverty. And it also doesn't recognise that people's circumstances change throughout their lives. When you have your kids, you may be well off. By the time they're 5 or 6, redundancy, illness, perhaps a child that has special needs and someone has to stay home. There's a whole raft of reasons why people end up in poverty, and most of them are out of their control. But we want to feel that we do control it, that we do control our lives, and so we tend to just sort of push people away when I'm not the same as you, and so it's your fault.
Where do you think the media play a role in either putting some light on these issues or just creating heat from them? I mean, we saw with the New Zealand On Air funded documentary, the child poverty,
Yeah.
that received a lot of criticism because it came out during an election.
Yeah.
Should the media be actually stepping up and doing more for this issue, or is it more a ratings game for them?
I think that there have been some really good things in the media, like that child poverty documentary, which Brian Bruce has now become a really big crusader on the issue, which is fantastic, and he has quite a large following. So that has worked out quite well. But there is a lot of knee-jerk stuff, there's a lot of editorials, there's a lot of use of images, I think, that are often, you know, might be in contrast with what the research in the article actually says, headlines, subs. There's sort of a culture of tending towards sensationalism to the left and to the right, and it doesn't do us a service at all.
Simon, Mana's Feed the Kids bill would provide lunch and breakfast at a cost of $100 million per year. This government have given away $400 million per year in tax cuts to the wealthiest New Zealanders. What happened to the egalitarian New Zealand?
Sadly, was it 2008? I think it started to disappear up someone's orifice. Two figures which really leapt out at me. Doug Heffernan, CEO, MRP, $1.49 million a year salary. This government, its annual contribution to this food and schools program is $1.9 million. So the figures are practically comparable. And I think that says it all about priorities, what's important to this government, and really the pittance that they had thrown at it. It really is the least that they could do.
Yeah.
Why do you think that this is happening in New Zealand? Is it a consumer culture? Have we moved away from ideas of solidarity and looking after the weaker amongst us?
I just think that what can you expect from a merchant banker but a credit default swap?
Right.
Is that, you know, this government has spent most of its time flogging assets, exploiting minerals and enabling gambling. That's how it's spent most of its time. And if you look at two numbers like the 113,000 supposedly mum and dad investors, and here we're looking at 270,000 children living in poverty. So this government doesn't have an economic compass, let alone a moral compass.
Final question to both of you. Will the $2 million per year in wet bix and extra milk make any meaningful change to our child poverty stats?
No, and I'm really worried that people are going to think something's been done now.
Oh,
so that's
right.
fine.
So
I
we can
shelve
shrug our
the
shoulders.
issue.
It's done, sort of thing.
I'm really concerned about that. This isn't going to solve it, and we shouldn't pretend that it will.
I agree. I think, you know, in a journey of 1,000 miles, this is a step 1 inch.
Right.
Yeah.
1 inch.
Final question to both of you. What should the government do, and who is responsible ultimately for child poverty? The state, the parent, or corporations?
I think there's, for me, a really clear direction we have to go in, which is lifting incomes. And the government has a significant role to play in that, both central and local government. but they're not. This government is not going to. If we want to actually have some impact on lifting incomes and lifting people, not just children but adults too, out of poverty, then we're going to have to change the government.
Simon, where does the balance lie? Who's ultimately responsible here?
I think that the government has a responsibility to provide employment. And I think that what we have at the moment is an economy based on speculation and not production, and that doesn't provide employment. And when people can't earn, then obviously they can't spend and they can't support their nearest and dearest. And I think that that's the problem.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with our second issue tonight. 2 of the last 3 polls have National in the high 40s, with Labour sinking. The government is pushing through deeply controversial pieces of legislation, yet seem untouchable. What has gone wrong with Labour? Simon, in the wake of these opinion polls, Tracy Watkins from the Dominion Post asks, how long will Shearer be seen as the solution or the problem? What's the answer?
Well, I dispute the premise of the question. And I think that the only things that are surging in this country are Auckland house prices, frustration in Christchurch, and child poverty. Now, yesterday, 2 polls came out, and here they are. The Roy Morgan poll had National at 41, Labour at 35, the Greens at 12.
Yep.
Fairfax had National at 49, Labour at 32, and the Greens at 11.
Yep.
Now, the only thing you can count on in these polls is that they'll come out on the same day and they'll give you completely contrary views as if they're polling different electorates.
Yeah.
So I think it's the premise of the question is not sound.
Yep.
I agree that Labour needs to sharpen up its act, and this government couldn't provide more ammunition to an opposition. But having said that, I just don't think that the polls are really giving an accurate assessment on how poorly the government is being received.
Julie, if I can quote to you, Labour leader David Shearer said providing breakfast to children was ultimately a parent's responsibility and any program must be targeted. That's not meaningfully different from John Key's position. Does David Shearer know what Labour stands for?
It is a little bit beneficiary on the roof, isn't it? I think that Labour is going through a huge internal process at the moment around their policies, around their policy platform, and I think often Shearer is speaking in a certain vacuum of internal decisions yet about those policies. So as a result, he's thinking on his feet, and he's not always saying the right things. That is worrying. Because he should be able to go back to his core values, which should be Labour Party values, and speak to those and not be saying things that are in conflict with that.
I was at the New Zealand regional conference a couple of weeks ago, the one down in Cambridge. Incredible policy, like you said, coming from the floor, from the actual the grassroots of the party. Very well thought out, very well argued. But you're not seeing that policy getting to the front bench. What's happening?
I think it's a disconnect between the party and the caucus, and I think that there's a lot of work going on internally to address it, but it's just too early in the electoral cycle for us to see it really making pace in terms of the caucus change or whatever. And I think they need to stick with Shearer. I think he can do it, but they've got a whole lot of work they've got to do around him to get him across the line.
What sort of media training does he need to be doing right now? Because when he starts talking, you can see the contradiction in his own face. He's not sure. He's not sure what's the policy. Where does Labour stand on it? Where do I stand on it? You can see that look of a lack of confidence in his delivery. And if he doesn't look like he can believe it, the punters aren't, are they?
I think one of the key things he needs to do is probably get out and have more conversations with real people and really get that confidence in himself in those day-to-day conversations. And then, that's something that Helen Clark did in the 90s when she was in opposition. She did a lot of work on doing very low-stakes media like, say, BFM. She had a weekly interview with them. I think Shearer needs to get a chance to do some more of that stuff. Real, just everyday people, everyday conversations, and get a bit more comfortable with himself and his leadership style.
Simon, why did 800,000 enrolled voters not bother voting in the last election? How does Labour appeal to them?
Well, it's interesting talking about David Shearer because he does come across a bit as Dr. Stumblebum, which is unfortunate because I think it's more of a problem of the form, not the content.
Right.
And I think they should stay with him. I think that he has everything that is required. But I think it's very difficult to be yourself and be, I guess, in front of the camera, in front of an audience, to let that basic, simple truth just transmit. I think he's got it's a very hard act to follow Russell Norman, who is extremely articulate and very centered in himself, and that comes across on camera.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that to speak to those 800,000 people, perhaps it's a function of time, and I still think there is time for him just to settle. Grant Robertson is very articulate, and I don't know, maybe you should just take him aside and just to, you know, stand on your feet and speak your mind.
Yeah.
You know, just speak your mind.
It's not like you don't have an electorate or an audience out there who are hungry for an alternative.
No, and I mean, essentially, he's an attractive candidate. You know, he is an attractive candidate, and I know that we got all of his backstory and all that sort of thing, and it didn't quite come to pass because when push comes to shove, he opens his mouth and it's boo-boo-boo-boo-boo-boo-boo. But be that as it may, that's a problem that can be solved.
Right.
Because I think his heart's in the right place as opposed to the government.
Yep.
And they have room to move.
Right. Julie, Labour policy is rated over 50% by the electorate, but they don't like David Shearer. At what point do you start going, it's the leader's problem and not the actual policy?
I think there has been a lot of ammunition, as Simon said. You know, obviously the topical one we've already discussed is food in schools, but there's also things like the paid parental leave veto.
TCSB.
Yeah, that's right. There's a whole lot of dodgy
A
stuff.
plethora. We can do an entire show on dodgy stuff the government's done.
It's
But
a
they
scandal
still
a
love
week.
him.
It's a
They-
scandal a
They
week.
do.
Scandal a week. It is a
Exactly.
scandal a week.
They still love John Key.
Yeah.
But we are starting to see, I think, a little bit of a turn. At the moment, Shearer and to a certain extent the Greens, they don't look like an alternative government just yet. The
Yep.
NZ Power announcement was really significant because I think it was a step in the right,
Yep.
left direction.
Yep.
And I think also that we're slowly starting to see a bit of media cynicism coming in around Key, which is going to mean his greatest strength, which has always been his personable nature, his, you know, I'm relaxed about this or whatever, is going to start to become a major weakness for him. And that's where it leaves a gap for Shearer. That's what I'm hoping.
Do you think that photo of John Key
Oh,
at
with
his
the
son's birthday, that was a terrible photo, wasn't it? Didn't that just sum it up?
Hither look.
Didn't
That
it?
come with the champagne as well.
Yeah.
Good God, good God.
Yeah.
You
I
can't
am
make that
God's
stuff
gift.
up. You
No.
can't make it up.
You can't Photoshop it, but somebody did Photoshop it with a bottle of milk instead,
so the
and
Weet-Bix.
Hekia with the wheat bits. I thought that was quite clever.
Yes. Very, very funny.
Final question to both of you. Look, if there is going to be a leadership coup against David Shearer, it needs to happen in June because a pretender to the throne would at least need 18 months lead-in. Do you think there's any possibility of that? What would you put the percentage at the moment?
Oh, less than 20.
Really?
Yeah,
Less than 20%?
yeah, I think so. I think that the you know, it's very pleasing for the electorate to see Labour and the Greens, like at the New Zealand Power thing, to see them stand there and to be able to work together.
Yep.
I think that sends a very good message. And the more that they can show that we can work with each other, that is the dynamic
Yep.
that will sell.
Yep.
More than perhaps them just being able to work by themselves.
Yep.
Just to be able to work with each other. It's a very appealing thing
Yep.
for an audience or for an electorate to see.
Percentage chance of a leadership spill over next
Oh,
month?
0.
Zero?
Yeah, really. I just, I think things have settled down in the Labour Party. I think there's an acceptance now that they need to back Shearer as fully as they can.
Yeah.
And I have to say I'm getting really sick of all the speculation about it because I think he's
don't
safe.
see it's an issue. I don't see it's an issue.
Has just before we move on, have you both been interested how John Key has spun the positioning now when he complains about the Greens being too far to the left, and that he is centre right?
The next election will be a
Yeah.
battle between the
he's the
centre right and the far left.
left.
Yeah.
Well, the
Yeah.
line is as clunky and as it is humorous and inaccurate. I was listening to it the other day, and old Coleman got up and spouted the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Goebbels would be proud. You know, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom.
Yeah.
It just comes out at the same time, and it sounds hollow,
Yeah.
which is exactly what it is. It's spin.
How has John Key been able to get away with convincing most of the country that he's centre right and not quite far right?
Well, it's also the hypocrisy, the fact he's in government with John Banks. And, you know, they've just last night pushed through charter school legislation that wasn't even National Party policy,
Yeah.
wasn't even ACT Party policy before the last election, and is absolutely wedded to right-wing approaches to education in the rest of the world. So the hypocrisy, I just hope that people are starting to catch on. But again, he's amiable. People still trust him.
Yeah.
Which I find astonishing, but.
There comes a point though where people start joining the dots.
Yes.
And there are so many dots. And finally, you join all the dots and they draw a very unflattering portrait.
Yeah.
And just go back to the polls. I think that what the polls show, if you look at them over time, is that we're key, once placed national in an invincible position,
Yes.
is that he is now, depending on what day it is and which way the wind's blowing, is that National cannot govern alone.
Right.
And they don't really have a credible coalition partner.
That's
Right.
right.
So histoire.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. There is much hysteria being maliciously caused by those against the unitary plan. Residents are becoming increasingly manipulated by falsehoods of what the plan will or won't do, with most Aucklanders propping up their false sense of wealth through inflated housing prices, any local politician threatening that pretense is doomed come the election. Julie, what has happened here? Is it a well-planned miscommunication scam, or has the council itself slipped in being able to communicate what's going on?
I think there's two key issues here. One is that the council PR machine has not been good enough and has not got going early enough either. And I think that's because I think they genuinely thought that most of the people who'd be interested in this pre-consultation stage, because it's not actually an official draft plan until later in the year, I think they thought most of the people who'd be really interested would be planners and developers.
Right.
And so the communication you would put out to planners and developers would be quite technical. But what's actually happened is that there's been a huge groundswell of interest from ordinary people, which is great, but they've had to play catch up to have the communication tools. And in that vacuum have stepped in some people who unfortunately are I think, creating some real problems and misinformation.
Is that an indictment on the Auckland Super City to begin with? I mean, here you have an organisation that is effectively responsible for a third of the country, and the actual budget they have to work with for communications, for staff, I mean, even the Mayor's office, are fairly tiny compared to the responsibilities to the rest of the country. Do they need to be better resourced?
I think that the unitary plan consultation, a lot of that has actually been quite well resourced, but it's played catch up.
Right.
And so, for example, on our local board, we had a discussion in April, early April, about scheduling public engagement opportunities in May. In March for April.
Right, right.
And actually, consultation goes right through till 31st of May, and it wasn't enough. We should have done more.
Right.
But we just didn't realise how interested people would be, which is fantastic. And at that point, it was too late to really get the wheels in place, certainly locally.
Right.
And I suspect there's been a bit of that at a regional level as well.
Simon, you were a candidate for the Auckland Mayoralty. Fantastic campaign.
Thank you.
You know how hard it is to get a message across. What works best here? Is it fear or is it facts?
It's always facts. It's always facts. And the Auckland Council has, in the final analysis, it's a good story to sell because Auckland has potential. One thing that was clear running for mayor, anyone that was blind could see, was that Auckland is about to undergo this huge growth. This is a remarkable opportunity for the country, and it needs to be planned. And in my judgment, Len Brown has done as much as could be done.
Right.
And I think that the government has been playing, sabotage here. I mean, Nick Smith, Brian Rudman in the paper, National's current behaviour has a pattern to it that goes beyond pre-election hyperbole. Having created the Super City less than 3 years ago, it is acting as though it was a big mistake, and the aim now is to emasculate the monster it created.
Yeah.
With friends like that, who needs enemies?
Yeah.
We are talking about the engine of the country, and you have basically the strongest council up against the government. And they're not working together, they're working apart. And I think that the people of Auckland will be worse off for it if that's not resolved.
What would your suggestion be here? If you were the mayor right now, what would you be saying to central government?
Oh, I don't know that I could say that on television.
A cleaner version.
Well, to be delivered the legislation for the Super City, and that's pretty clear. I mean, it was a roadmap on what needs to be done and how to do it. And to be hampered in achieving that is just not good politics, and it's not good economics for the biggest city in the country.
Yeah.
And to try and score cheap political points, I just don't think they ever got over the fact that they didn't win the election.
Right.
Mainly because
Right.
they had a rather how can I put it, fraudulently challenged candidate running on the right there.
Yes.
They've never really got over it, and there's been quite a lot of, I think, vitriol and spite associated with that.
Final question to both of you. What does Auckland need to do to become the most livable city in the world?
I think as Simon's identified, there's a huge opportunity with this growth to really increase the amount of vibrancy. And vibrancy does generally come about when people do live closer together in villages within a larger city, where they have public transport options also that allow them to live closer to each other without needing a lot of car parking and stuff like that. And so I think the public transport stuff is the thing we really have to get right. And actually we're going to have to build it before it's necessary in some cases, not wait until we're screaming out for it.
What do we need to do to make Auckland the most livable city?
Well, I mean, there's a simple branding message here. I mean, Auckland is the first city of Asia Pacific. It's where Asia and the Pacific meet, and I mean that is something. I think the energy that has, it's unique in the world, and I think that is something that can really brand Auckland as we're competing now against Sydney and Brisbane and all of the Australian cities. This is something that is unique to us. I also come from the sort of the creative background, if you like, and I think that is another thing that Auckland could really exploit. Because I mean, we have SPP and television made up here. I think that's something that we could really work on as well.
Let's wrap the show with a final word. Julie, your final word this week is?
My final word is please enrol to vote. Yes, there's an election next year, but there's also an election this year. Local government politics is really important.
Yes. And
you have to be on the roll to be able to vote. If you don't get a pack by July the 4th in the mail, do something about it because you're not on the roll and you need to be to vote.
Are you running?
I am.
Excellent. Where?
I'm running for Roscoe Community Voice on the Puketapapa local board.
Good luck. Simon, your final word this week?
My final word, it's a shameless plug for the play that I'm working on at the moment,
Yes,
which is
please
Anne
do.
Boleyn. I'm
Yes.
playing Thomas Cromwell, who was Henry VIII's right-hand hatchet man
Yes.
and lawyer. It's a wonderful, rollicking romp through Tudor England and an exploration of the rise and fall of one of history's most beguiling women. And of course, the Tudor period is very, very interesting. There's a lot to be said for it. Most notably that if a politician wanders off the track, he can get his head chopped off. And as I look at this government, I can think of many prime candidates. So that's Anne Boleyn at the Q Theatre from the 13th of June. Please come along.
Political regicide there from Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Simon. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word, the Marlborough Express has drawn sharp anger for a cartoon published this week that insinuates fat, deceptive Māori will eat food in schools so that they can spend more money on ciggies, booze and pokies. The grinding poverty that destroys so many of the lives of the 270,000 children crushed by it is not a laughing matter. It is a deep shame this country of plenty should carry. And this cartoon by the Marlborough Express managed to offend every sensibility. For shame on the Marlborough Express. For shame that so many New Zealanders seem to think it's funny. And for shame that we don't have a Race Relations Commissioner who can articulate an appropriate response. Marlborough Express editor has said of the cartoon that he's delighted it sparked discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, playing to our worst natures isn't sparking discussion. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local